7:42 a.m. Asunción, Paraguay. A private cardiac clinic on Avenida Mariscal Lopez. Dr. Martin Halverson walked into operating room 3. He scrubbed for 90 seconds. He gloved. He stepped to the table where a 58-year-old construction executive waited for a mitral valve replacement. 6 floors below in the clinic's administrative parking lot, 11 men in civilian clothes sat in 3 vehicles. 4 were U.S. Marshals, 3 were Paraguayan Federal Police, 2 were Interpol liaisons, 1 was a DEA regional asset, 1 was a translator. They had been waiting for this surgery to begin for 9 days. Because Dr. Martin Halverson did not exist, his medical license was forged, his Paraguayan residency permit was purchased, his name on the clinic's roster was a cover identity, built over 14 months of preparation, his real name was Marcus Holbrook, and in the United States, a federal indictment charged him with running a $180 million Medicare fraud scheme built on 900 unnecessary cardiac procedures performed on patients who did not need them. The U.S. Marshals Service had been hunting him across 4 countries for 7 months. Now they were about to take him at the scrub sink of an operating room, mid-surgery, with a patient on the table and a newborn son asleep in an apartment 11 blocks away. The entry point was September 19, 2025. Phoenix, Arizona. A hospital parking garage on East Thomas Road at 6:14 p.m. Security cameras captured Holbrook walking to his black Porsche Cayenne after a scheduled surgery. He was carrying a leather briefcase and a gym bag. He unlocked the vehicle. He drove out of the garage. He made one stop at a Chase branch on East Camelback Road, where he withdrew $9,800 in cash, just below the federal reporting threshold. Then he disappeared. 12 hours later, at 6:23 a.m. on September 20th, a federal arrest team from the FBI's Phoenix field office arrived at his home in Paradise Valley. They had a sealed indictment. They had an arrest warrant and a search warrant for his office at Valley Cardiac Associates. They did not have Holbrook. His wife, Catherine Holbrook, 44, answered the door in a bathrobe. She told agents her husband had not come home from work. She assumed he was at the hospital dealing with a complication. She was wrong. What agents recovered from the home that morning told the first part of the story. The master bedroom closet was half empty. A hidden safe in the garage was open and cleared out. The family's 3 passports were accounted for, but Holbrook's medical school yearbook was missing, and so were a small box of personal papers his wife later described as the things he kept from before we were married. His surgical practice, Valley Cardiac Associates, filed for bankruptcy 7 days later. His 2 teenage daughters, 15 and 17, were pulled from their private school the following Monday. Catherine Holbrook would cooperate fully with investigators. She would tell them she had suspected nothing. The indictment Holbrook had fled was 142 pages long. Between January 2021 and August 2025, Valley Cardiac Associates had billed Medicare for 912 cardiac catheterizations, 440 stent placements, and 271 electrophysiology studies. The total bill to the federal government across that window was $183 million. A forensic medical review ordered by the Department of Justice, conducted by 3 independent cardiologists contracted out of the Mayo Clinic and Cleveland Clinic, had examined a random sample of 200 patient files. The reviewers concluded that in at least 62% of the sample procedures, there was no documented clinical indication. The patients did not meet criteria for intervention. The procedures had been performed anyway. Several patients had suffered complications. 2 had died of cardiac events in the 12 months following procedures the reviewers described in clinical language as not supported by the presenting evidence. The scheme had one defining anomaly. Industry benchmark for positive finding diagnostic catheterizations at a typical cardiology practice sits between 28 and 35%. At Valley Cardiac Associates, the rate was 91%. 91% of patients who came in for a diagnostic procedure were found to have a condition requiring immediate intervention. That number cannot exist in a legitimate practice. It was the number that started everything. A CMS fraud analyst named Rebecca Vance had flagged it in March 2025. She was based in Baltimore, working through a quarterly screen of outlier billing patterns. Valley Cardiac Associates sat 3 standard deviations above the national mean on positive finding rate, on average procedures per Medicare-enrolled patient, and on billing to physician hour ratio. 1 physician, 900 procedures a year. Across a 4-year window, the math did not work. No single cardiologist working a standard surgical schedule could physically perform that volume and sustain a 91% positive finding rate on legitimate indications. Either the patients were being selected fraudulently, or the procedures were being documented for billing but not performed, or something else. Vance's memo was 6 pages. It was forwarded to the FBI's Phoenix field office on April 11, 2025. That was when Special Agent Daniel Kessler caught the case. Kessler had been with the Bureau's healthcare fraud unit for 11 years. He had worked dental fraud in Florida, hospice fraud in Texas, durable medical equipment fraud in Southern California. He recognized the Valley Cardiac Associates pattern right away. He also recognized something else. The billing codes had been structured with unusual care. Whoever had designed this scheme understood Medicare's audit triggers and had engineered the submissions to stay just below the thresholds that would have generated an automated review. Kessler spent 68 days going through the case file before he pulled the trigger on surveillance, and one detail kept nagging him. The procedures were real. The operating room records matched. The nursing staff had been present. The catheterizations had actually happened. What was fraudulent was the medical justification, the patient selection, and in some cases, the interpretation of the diagnostic images. That meant Halbrook had been performing cardiac procedures on people who did not need them for 4 years, for money. Investigators placed Valley Cardiac Associates under a Title III wiretap on June 14, 2025. They obtained a search warrant for the practice's billing servers on July 2nd. They began running down the patient list. The first anomaly came from a retired postal worker named Eleanor Vance, no relation to the analyst, who had been catheterized in February 2024 at the age of 73. A Bureau contract physician reread her diagnostic images. The images showed no significant coronary disease. The records documented a 94% left anterior descending stenosis. The two did not match. One of them had been fabricated. By mid-August, investigators had documented 47 patient files where the imaging studies did not support the billed findings. They had recorded 3 conversations in which Halbrook instructed his office manager to adjust the documentation on specific patients. They had bank records showing transfers from the practice's operating account to a series of LLCs registered in Delaware and Nevada, which in turn had wired funds to an account in the Cayman Islands under a shell entity named Alturas Medical Holdings. What investigators did not know, what they would not know until much later, was that Halbrook had been watching the surveillance from the inside. Not literally, he had not detected the wiretap, but he had noticed the audit letters. He had noticed the pattern of CMS requests for supporting documentation. He had noticed that his billing administrator had been served with a grand jury subpoena on August 29th. He had put the pieces together and he had started moving. I spent hours going through the timeline on this case, and one detail kept nagging me. Halbrook's exit was not panicked. It was engineered. The Cayman account had been opened in July 2024, 14 months before the arrest warrant. A Panamanian shell company in his cover name had been registered in October 2024. His Paraguayan residency application had been filed in January 2025. He had been preparing to run since before the CMS analyst ever flagged his billing pattern. He was either paranoid or he had known from the beginning that this was going to end this way. If you follow federal cases, go ahead and hit the like button now. This one gets more complicated before it gets cleaner. The sealed indictment was returned by a federal grand jury in Phoenix on September 17, 2025. The arrest was planned for 6 a.m. on September 20th. Someone, somewhere had told Halbrook the timeline. The FBI opened an internal leak investigation on September 22nd. It is still open. It has not identified the source. Halbrook crossed the Arizona-Mexico border by private vehicle at the Nogales port of entry at approximately 11:40 p.m. on September 19th. He was driving a leased Toyota 4Runner registered to a cover identity. He used a Mexican tourist permit in the name of Martin Halverson. The border was routine. He was one of 23,000 vehicles crossing south that night. He was in Mexico City by the afternoon of September 21st. The U.S. Marshals Service's International Investigations Branch picked up his trail on September 25th, 6 days into the manhunt, based on a credit card hit at a hotel in the Polanco district. By the time Marshals and Mexican Federal Police arrived at the hotel on September 27th, Halbrook had been gone for 40 hours. The trail went cold. It would stay cold for 14 weeks. The raid on Valley Cardiac Associates happened at 7:14 a.m. on September 20th, simultaneous with the attempted arrest. 41 agents from the FBI, HHS-OIG, and IRS Criminal Investigation entered the practice's 3 floors on East Shea Boulevard. They seized 32 workstations, 11 servers, 473 patient files flagged in the indictment, and a locked filing cabinet in Holbrook's private office containing 9 passports, 6 of them counterfeit, 3 of them real, and registered to people who did not know their identities had been used. Investigators also found a handwritten notebook. Inside were phone numbers for contacts in Mexico City, Panama City, Asuncion, and a Guyanese border town called Lethem. Next to each contact was a dollar figure, ranging from $18,000 to $240,000. The notebook was Holbrook's disappearance budget. Total, $1,740,000. Here is the part that doesn't make sense on the surface. The notebook was in a locked cabinet, in his office, in his own handwriting. A man who had spent 14 months engineering a clean exit left his entire contingency network in a filing cabinet that investigators found within 6 hours. It was the single biggest break in the case, and it should not have been there. One theory, he had copies elsewhere and did not expect anyone to get to that cabinet before he was gone. Another, he intended to retrieve it the night of September 19th and ran out of time. A third, he wanted the contacts to know, eventually, that he had not flipped, that the list had been taken from him, not handed over. Marshals have never confirmed which theory they believe. What the notebook did was compress what would have been a 2-year manhunt into a targeted search across 4 specific countries. The International Investigations Branch divided the contacts among 4 regional teams. The Mexico team ran the Mexico City Trail. The Panama team surveilled 3 contacts there. The Paraguay team began coordinating with Paraguayan federal police through the U.S. Embassy in Asuncion. The Guyana team ran down the Lethem contact, which turned out to be a document fabricator who had produced one of the passports found in the cabinet. The Panama lead produced a financial trail. Alturas Medical Holdings had wired $410,000 to a law firm in Panama City on September 4, 2025, 15 days before Holbrook vanished. The firm was being used as an intermediary for a second shell, Clínica Cordialis SRL, registered in Asuncion on September 12th. That was the first real signal that Paraguay was the destination, not a layover. On October 8th, Paraguayan federal police placed Clínica Cordialis SRL under discreet surveillance. The clinic was real. It had a physical address. It had a medical director named Dr. Rodrigo Ayala, a legitimate Paraguayan cardiologist with a clean professional record. The clinic was not busy. It saw a handful of wealthy private patients. Ayala had recently hired a consulting cardiologist, an American, he told associates, with excellent credentials, brought in to handle complex cases. The consulting cardiologist's name on the clinic's internal roster was Dr. Martin Halverson. The U.S. Marshal Service did not move. They watched. Moving too early would burn the Paraguayan cooperation and give Holbrook time to run again. And there was a complication. Paraguay and the United States have an extradition treaty, but it is slow. Holbrook, if he understood the system, and everything suggested he did, could file a series of appeals that would keep him in Paraguay for years. The arrest had to be clean, the evidence of identity had to be airtight, and the diplomatic channel had to be prepared in advance. The Marshals assigned the case to a senior deputy named Anita Rios in the International Investigations Branch in Virginia. Rios was 46, a former Miami field deputy who had spent 9 years on international fugitive operations. She had run 3 successful extraditions out of South America. She understood the Paraguayan system. She also understood that Holbrook was not going to be identified by a surveillance photograph alone. Plastic surgery was possible. He had been out of the United States for 4 months. Anyone serious about disappearing would have altered their face. The identification came from a different source. On January 14, 2026, Clínica Cordialis SRL posted a photograph to its social media page. The post was in Spanish. It celebrated the successful valve replacement of a prominent local businessman, thanking the surgical team, and it included a group photo taken in the clinic's conference room. The American consulting cardiologist was not named. His face in the photograph was partially turned. His hair was shorter than it had been in Phoenix. A goatee had been added. The resemblance was there, but not conclusive. A Marshals analyst named Priya Khatri, assigned to the Paraguay desk at the International Investigations Branch, zoomed in on the photograph. She was not looking at the face. She was looking at the hands. Holbrook had a distinctive scar on the back of his left hand, a cooking burn from childhood, documented in his medical school physical exam records, documented in a Phoenix dermatology visit in 2019, and visible in a 2023 promotional photograph from Valley Cardiac Associates. The scar ran from the base of the index finger back toward the wrist in a curved line approximately 4 centimeters long. It was unusual, it was permanent, No plastic surgery could have fully erased it. In the clinic's group photograph, the consulting cardiologist's left hand was visible, resting on the back of a chair. The scar was there. Same shape, same location. Khatri flagged the photograph at 2:17 p.m. on January 14, 2026. The case was escalated to Rios within the hour. The Marshals spent the next 47 days building the takedown. Put yourself in Rios's position for a moment. You have a positive identification on a fugitive who has been running for 4 months. You have a host country that will cooperate, but slowly. You have a target working inside an operating room, a target who, if tipped off, can disappear into Paraguay's interior within 6 hours, where he has money, a new wife, and a newborn child. You have to coordinate a foreign federal police force, an embassy, an extradition paperwork package that has to be ready to file the moment the arrest happens, and a public affairs strategy for 2 countries. You have to do all of this without leaking. You get 1 shot. The Paraguayan federal police assigned the case to Comisario Federico Brites, a 21-year veteran of the anti-corruption unit. Brites was given a parallel surveillance team. Over February and the first half of March 2026, the team documented Holbrook's patterns. He worked at the clinic 4 days a week. He lived in an apartment on Calle Dr. Rosendo Carissimo with a Paraguayan woman named Lorena Cáceres, 31 years old, a surgical nurse at a different clinic, married to Holbrook in a civil ceremony on February 20th, 2026. The couple had a newborn son registered as Mateo Halverson Cáceres, born on January 30th, 2026. The child changed the calculation. Arresting Holbrook at the apartment would mean a forced entry in front of a 3-month-old infant and a wife who, based on every available piece of intelligence, had no idea who her husband actually was. Rios vetoed that option on March 4th. Arresting him on the street would mean a public scene in downtown Asunción, with unpredictable variables. Vetoed. Arresting him at the clinic, outside of surgery hours, would mean alerting clinic staff and risking a run. Holbrook had an escape route pre-positioned. The surveillance team had identified a Land Rover registered to one of his cover LLCs, parked 2 blocks from the clinic, with a go bag containing cash, a second cover passport, and a prepaid phone. The plan that Rios and Brites built was the operating room plan. Holbrook's surgical schedule was posted internally each Monday for the following week. On March 23, 2026, the schedule showed he would perform a mitral valve replacement on Wednesday, April 22nd at 7:30 a.m. A senior patient, a 4-hour procedure. Once he scrubbed in, he could not leave the sterile field without abandoning the patient on the table. He was operationally immobilized for 4 hours. They would take him when he stepped out of the sterile field, not a second before. 3 FBI field offices activated simultaneously when the go order came down on April 21st. The Phoenix field office coordinated with Valley Cardiac Associates bankruptcy trustee to freeze the final disbursements from the practice's estate. The Miami field office activated the extradition legal team. The Washington field office coordinated with the State Department. The raid on the clinic was not a raid, it was an escorted entry. At 7:28 a.m. on April 22nd, 2026, the 11-man team arrived at the clinic's administrative entrance. They presented documentation to the clinic's director, who had been briefed the night before by Comisario Brites. The director, Dr. Rodrigo Ayala, had been cleared by Paraguayan investigators. He had believed Holbrook's credentials were real. He was given a choice: cooperate silently or be charged as an accessory. He chose to cooperate. The team waited in the observation gallery. They watched Holbrook perform a 4-hour, 13-minute valve replacement. The procedure was, by every medical measure, flawless. The patient's vital signs remained stable throughout. The valve seated properly. The heart restarted on the first attempt after the cross clamp was released. At 11:41 a.m., Holbrook handed the closure to his assisting surgeon, a Paraguayan resident who had been cleared into the operation 40 minutes earlier, and stepped out of the sterile field. He walked to the scrub sink. He began to remove his gloves. Deputy U.S. Marshal Anita Rios stepped around the corner of the corridor and addressed him by name. Marcus Holbrook. Not Martin Halverson. Marcus Holbrook. He did not run. He did not speak for 7 seconds. Then he said in English, "The patient is stable. Please make sure the patient is stable." He was handcuffed at 11:43 a.m. The patient, the 58-year-old construction executive, survived. He recovered without complications. He was discharged 9 days later. He was informed after his discharge that the surgeon who had saved his life was a wanted federal fugitive from the United States. He declined to comment publicly. Lorena Cáceres was interviewed at the apartment at 12:50 p.m. by Paraguayan federal police with a U.S. Marshals observer present. She was shown Halbrook's United States identification, his actual name, the indictment summary translated into Spanish, and photographs of his first wife and 2 daughters. She asked twice whether the documents were authentic. She was told they were. She asked for water. She was given water. Then she asked to hold her son. She was not charged with any offense. Paraguayan investigators concluded she had no knowledge of Halbrook's true identity or history. She retained local counsel. The marriage under Paraguayan civil law was subsequently annulled on grounds of fraud. She kept the child. The child's legal name was changed. Here is the take that will probably get flack. The United States Medicare system flagged Halbrook's billing anomaly in March 2025, 6 months before he ran. CMS had statistical evidence of fraud. The FBI opened an investigation in April. The indictment came down in September. During those 6 months, Halbrook performed an additional 141 cardiac procedures. Some of those procedures were medically unnecessary. Some of those patients suffered complications. The system that eventually caught him took 6 months to move, and in those 6 months, real people had their chests open for no clinical reason. The delay was not the FBI's fault. Healthcare fraud cases require extensive documentation. The agents moved as fast as the evidence would allow. The failure was upstream, in a billing system that flagged the anomaly, then allowed the flagged physician to keep operating for half a year while the paperwork caught up. The extradition took 90 days. Halbrook was transported from Asunción to Miami on July 21, 2026, under armed escort on a chartered U.S. Marshals flight. He made his initial appearance in the U.S. District Court for the District of Arizona on July 23rd. He pleaded not guilty. He's being held without bail at the Central Arizona Florence Correctional Complex pending trial. The government's case against him consists of 47 separate counts, including healthcare fraud, wire fraud, money laundering, aggravated identity theft, and unlawful flight to avoid prosecution. If convicted on all counts, he faces a maximum sentence of 312 years. His 2 daughters, 15 and 17 at the time he vanished, are now 16 and 18. The older one has started college. Neither has spoken publicly. What do you think? Did the system fail the patients who were operated on during those 6 months between the flag and the indictment? Or was that delay the unavoidable cost of building a case that would hold up at trial? It is a real question. The answer shapes how these cases get prosecuted for the next decade. Federal investigators have recovered roughly $68 million of the $183 million Halbrook billed to Medicare. The rest, $115 million, is gone. Some of it was spent, some of it was moved through the Cayman account, and a second shell that investigators have traced to a jurisdiction that does not cooperate with U.S. asset recovery. Some of it is in the estimation of the Financial Crimes Unit working the case, never coming back. 2 names in Halbrook's notebook have never been identified. 1 phone number in Panama City went dead 3 weeks after the arrest. A Paraguayan national listed under the first name Ezekiel, with no surname, has not been located. The network that helped Marcus Halbrook disappear was wider than just the contacts in that notebook. Most of it remains unmapped. Clínica Cordialis SRL has been closed by Paraguayan regulators. Dr. Rodrigo Ayala's medical license has been suspended pending investigation. He was not charged. There is a line in the final pretrial brief that reads almost like fiction. It describes the moment Halbrook stepped away from the scrub sink and was identified. The prosecutor wrote, "The defendant's first recorded words upon apprehension were not a denial, not a protest, not an invocation of counsel. They were an instruction to his team to protect the patient he had just operated on." A man who had performed 900 unnecessary cardiac procedures over 4 years on patients he had billed Medicare for looked at the agent arresting him and asked her to make sure the man on the table survived the surgery. Both things were true about him at the same time. Investigators are still in their own private conversations, trying to decide what to do with that. The fugitive has been returned. The indictment will proceed to trial. The patients who should not have been operated on do not get their procedures back. The demand for cardiac procedures is not going away. The billing codes that made this scheme possible are still active. The next Valley Cardiac Associates, if it exists, is already running.